9:24 a.m. October 1st, and this is the Podley Weekly. Well, surprise, I'm here. It's week 5. Taking a little bit of a mid-break from vacation to get this Podley out, to get the Nut Report out. Consistency is king in fantasy and in life, and we are 4 weeks in, under our belts. I don't know if we learned anything so far, but today's podcast will help kind of guide, hopefully put some reason to what we have all seen thus far. This past week wasn't exactly the most exciting week in terms of matchups. We had many blowouts. I think the best one, of course, was Brandon and Nick in their Monday Night Showdown. Didn't seem to have much of a stress. Usually when those games kind of come down to a pass or two being caught, there's always a bunch of exchanging of group me messages and things like that. And instead it felt very much just like, oh, okay, the game's over. I was hoping to see some of the stress and the hand wringing, and it didn't necessarily fully happen. We also have had 2 trades, which usually I leave, the trades up to Wilson time and on some of the other shows to discuss, but these particular trades I thought were kind of funny in just the grand scheme of things when you consider what was exchanged between 2 different teams. So we had Alec and Jaden trade, and Jaden acquired Juwan Johnson from Alec for like fab and a very small amount of draft dollars. And why this is semi-funny to me is that Alec is famously 13th in tight end scoring with a total at this stage of the season 9 points to his name. And he is trading away a tight end to Jaden, who is even more desperate for a tight end. And Jaden, who sits 14th in tight end scoring with 7.2 points on the year as of week 5. I just thought it was amazing that the 2 teams that are in need of tight ends are exchanging tight ends with each other. And the result of Juwan Johnson being on Jaden's team was pretty unremarkable. I don't know if there's any levels of buyer's remorse, but sometimes when you throw a player out there, you're kind of hoping for more than 2.8 points, which is what Jaden got from Juwan Johnson. But I thought that was a funny exchange, and I thought, well, that's just strange. We probably won't get another one of those types of let's help each other out at the bottom and exchange our shitty tight ends to each other. But then we got another trade last night between Cal and Cody. Cal, who, mysteriously, I don't understand. I just don't understand. Cal trades away Dak Prescott and receives Jackson Dart and 15 draft dollars, which is a significant amount of money. But I also, everyone who doesn't understand the amount of money that was exchanged, or at least the amount of money that Cody gave up, doesn't understand what it's like, or hasn't probably experienced what it's like to not have a QB. I myself know this from last year. It is incredible how one position can truly, they always say it's the most important position in football, and they're not kidding. It's also the most important position in fantasy football, because when you don't have a good one, the whole thing sucks. And as a reminder, Cody is averaging 9 points a game from his QB position. He is averaging more points from his kicker, which is about 10 points, than he is from his QB. So Cody's in some pretty desperate positions. In fact, Peyton, who's leading the league in tight end scoring, has more points, is averaging more points per game from his tight end, which is historically the lowest scoring position in all of fantasy football, than what Cody's averaging right now from his QB position. So painting that picture vividly, Cody and Cal exchange QBs. And similar to the Alec and Jaden situation, you just rarely see 2 teams that are really bad exchanging a position that they're both really bad at. Cal, again, has famously made the wrong decision on all of his QBs thus far this season. Dak had a great game. Cal had a great week in general, so at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference that he didn't get the 3 extra points or whatever from Dak, and he started Justin Fields. But clearly, with this move, Cal sending away Dak to Cody, that there is some solidification of the QB position for Cal in his mind. So he's going to be rolling forward with Justin Fields and Jackson Dart. But the humor of all this is that Cal is 12th in QB scoring, averaging 13 points a game, and he is the one who's sending Cody, who is 14th in QB scoring, averaging 9 points a game, a QB. What could possibly go wrong? The two teams have only gotten 4 touchdowns to their names. They're the only teams to have less than 5 touchdowns from the position, and the two of them are exchanging position, exchanging players. So those two trades, I thought were just, I understand what everyone's trying to do. Jaden's trying to improve his tight end position. And I guess the only suitable suitor there was Alec, who is right above him in scoring. And then Cody's trying to solve his QB position. And he gave it the 1 week, put your fist in, just kind of do a yah situation. But, Cody's he tried his best. He gave his best foot forward on using the waiver wire. And I guess he could try to ride it out one more week with Jackson Dart. And it was, it was a promising start for Jackson Dart. But Cody clearly found a suitor. Just ironically, that suitor is just someone who's equally in QB hell as he is. Now, of course, Cal will look at this and we'll be very pleased to have his $15 and to trade away Dak. But going to the broader point of why I'm confused by Cal is, he made this move for George Pickens, which, there's a I don't even know what it is. There's a certain type of player that the majority of this league is in love with. And that type of player seems to fall into the George Pickens, Devonta Smith, Calvin Ridley, a lot of Tanner adjacent players here, Jordan Addison, these kind of boom bust, could be good, mostly bad kind of players. And I am famously not a George Pickens fan. But my broader point of all this is that, like, Cal, famously a Cowboys fan, makes this move for George Pickens, who famously needs to catch the ball from a QB, that QB being on Cal's team. And I hate to use this phrase one more time, but famously, QBs and wide receivers on the same team is what we call a stack. And you'd think that if Cal's making the significant move that he did to get George Pickens, that he obviously believes in something. He obviously believes in the QB position in some form or another. And I don't understand why he's now making this call of sending away the QB of the wide receiver that he just traded for. But, Cal moves in mysterious ways. And I can't question what he's thinking here. He is now 100% all in on the Justin Fields experiment, which looks good. The 2 games that he's completed, it has looked really good, that's always good. He's playing he played a pretty non-traditional Steelers defense, which looks bad, and the Dolphins. So I guess if you want to extrapolate those 2 performances out for the rest of the season, just hope that the Jets play some garbage teams, which they are playing a garbage team this week. They're playing the Cowboys. So as for week 5 and getting beyond the trades themselves, we are going to go through the tiers. We're going to go through the scoring. We're going to go through the historical stats, which all have been updated, of course, as they always are. And then we'll go into a segment. So for week 5, our tier 1 teams, it's the same 5 names, just in a different order. Our tier 1 teams are myself, Jaden, Dylan, Nick, and Brandon. So the big differences here is that Nick has fallen from the 2 seed, Jaden and Dylan have moved up subsequently, and Brandon remains at the 5 seed. I feel like at this point, it was hard to say, anything slanderous, because Nick started this season similar to myself and Jaden with a bunch of 100-point games, and to have a 74-point outing against Brandon, his first real test against a top 5 team, and he failed with 74 points. Now we kind of look at Nick's team a little bit differently. With the rest of the teams here, at least myself, Jaden, and Dylan, we're all averaging over 100 points. And for a team that had been ripping off 100-point games, that suddenly you go to 74 and you're now sub 100 in your points per game. It's like, oh, the mask has been lifted, like Scooby-Doo style on Nick's team. And it's like, oh man, it was Carl from down the street. He was just it wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a scary thing. So I feel like the wool has been kind of pulled over on Nick's team. For myself, Jaden, and Dill, I guess more for myself and Jaden, we've been just since playing in week 1, just ripping off 100-point games, which has been thrilling. It's really quite exciting to have this many 100-point games to start the season. Jaden has been definitely, since the beginning, I don't know if we've hit really Jaden's high watermark yet. 117 points is his high watermark so far. I feel like he's got a 130-point game in him, and he's getting Jaden Daniels back. So he kind of survived those 2 weeks with Marcus Mariota, which Jaden is often the type that will be like, if my QB's down, I'll just pick up the backup QB on the same team. And I guess it makes the rooting interest very easy because Jaden just basically picked up. I mean, Mariota played probably better than Daniels has this season. So yeah, Mariota did his thing, and Daniels theoretically should be back, and the wheels keep churning there. Dill is still continuing on his ways. His luck of situations have been very much benefiting him this year. And again, like I said last episode or last week, I'm like I feel a kindred understanding of Dill's team. I'm not going to be, I have a lot of the question marks on the Roma Dunze, and I'm only saying what the public opinion is of just the same man that was, horribly underused. And I think it's really a big reveal of like a competent coaching staff really can reveal a much better player than there actually was the previous year. And Mecca Ibuka has been a revelation. And the only thing that I think that Dill can't really contend with is that, Baker Mayfield hasn't necessarily been up in the upper elite. He's definitely a tier 2 quarterback, but he's not going to be pressing Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson anytime soon for any of those top spots. But it's decent enough for Dill, and I think he's pleased with that. And then Brandon, who had a big test this week against Nick. Again, Nick had only been doing 100-point games, and Brandon only had 1 to his name. Wins a really ugly fight by like a point or so. But a win's a win, and so Brandon stays in the top 5. He has 18 touchdowns. He's the only team in the Tier 1 teams that doesn't have over 20. So it's, the fight continues. The one thing that's ironic about all this, and this is the history of all these like 4-0 teams and 5-0 teams, and some of those teams, no offense, Brandon, but have been Brandon, that have been ripping off these kind of seasons, these kind of like starts of seasons, is if you look at the playoff chances, everyone who's 3-1 has an 88% chance of making the playoffs, which makes a ton of sense. Of course, you're like, well, they're pretty good. But if you look at the 4-0, myself, 71% chance of making the playoffs. And then if I go 5-0, it's a 63% chance of making the playoffs. And it's all because of all these teams that start so goddamn hot and then they just fade away. And the last time that we had a team that started like 4-0 and missed the playoffs, I'm just looking very quickly. Oh my God, I'm looking at the wrong category. Brandon did this in 2022. He started, in fact, 5-0 and missed the playoffs in 2022. And Mitch did this in 2023. He started 4-0 and missed the playoffs in 2023. So you start factoring in the fact that there's so many of these teams. In fact, we've had 14 teams go 4-0, but only 10 of them made the playoffs. Those 4 teams, and 2 of them most recently, has really lowered the playoff chances. So it looks a little wacky for a team that's undefeated to have actually a lower playoff chance than the teams that already have 1 loss. Moving on to Tier 2. Some minor changes here. We have Christian, Cal, Peyton, Alec, and Jesse. So Christian, Cal, and Peyton are 2-2. Alec and Jesse are 1-3. The biggest jump here is Cal. Cal moved from the 11th seed all the way to the 7th seed. Big jump there as we were starting to see some signs of life from his team. 2 back-to-back weeks over 100 points. Season high amount of points for the league this past week with 148 points. Touchdowns are slowly climbing, still at 16 touchdowns, which is, I think, the 4th lowest in the league. So things are starting to finally click a little bit. And I think bolstered by all that is that Cal has actually not yet played a bottom 4 team. He's only played his mid-5s, and he's played a top 5 team. So he's not bottom feeding, which is cannot be said the same for Christian, who has played 2 top 5 teams and lost, but has only gotten his 2 wins against bottom 4 teams. So, Cal is starting to look a little bit more legit than he did at the start of the season. It's still got to see more games like this, but he's definitely risen up to the 7th seed. Cal and Christian kind of represent those 2 teams that I think could jump to Tier 1 depending on how performances go. These 2 are also averaging over 100 points a game. And then you have Peyton, who sits at 2-2, kind of in his own space. Again, losing Malik Neighbors though is going to have a bit of an effect because there was 3 weeks, or last 3 weeks have been looking a lot better for Peyton. He had 2 100-point games in there. He's really bounced back from his week 1 63-point outing. But Malik Neighbors being gone really takes some of the teeth out of what Peyton was hoping for the season. And, it's now looking at the reliance of the team itself. I think, as always, Peyton is going to be just kind of stuck in this situation of, like, who do I start? I'm, again, curious that Cody went for the Dak Prescott of it all, who has objectively been playing really well, passing the eye test of it all, and not trying to go to Peyton for, like, the Drake May or the Bo Nix. But, every single week, I think Peyton has to have the conversation with himself about, like, do I start Bo Nix? Do I start Drake May? This week, Bo Nix outscored Drake May by 1.5 or so. But yeah, Peyton now, the rest of the season, is going to be relying on the ever-reliable Devin Achane, which he has been pretty good. He's been not bad, but, he's always nicked up in some form or another, and he's also a small guy. Kenneth Walker, who is also really rarely ever healthy. Chris Olave, who is on a bad team, but also rarely always healthy. And then T. Higgins, on a bad team, and again, rarely ever healthy. Mike Evans should be coming back soon, who is currently not healthy. So that will help Peyton's team out, but he's got some things to deal with. As for the other two teams, Alec and Jesse, they are 1-3 apiece. They are 9th and 10th in scoring apiece. They're on a 2-game losing streak apiece. And things aren't looking positively. I think the trend is looking the arrow is pointing down a little bit. They both won in week 2. Since then, the points have been slowly diminishing, with Jesse doing 76 this week and Alec doing 81. Both those teams had to take on some 100-point games, so not much you can do at that point. At least you can put your hands up and go, like, well, I was never meant to win. But Alec and Jesse have some things to switch up. Jesse's played a pretty difficult schedule so far. He's drawn 3 games against the top 5 and lost all 3. So should be, considering there's only 5 teams up there, should be starting to get a lighter schedule, hopefully, going forward, which we'll talk about schedules in a little bit later. And the same thing goes for Alec. I mean, it's just a bit of a carousel there for the tight end position. Not to say that's the only reason why he's not doing well, but that's not a position that is a position of strength for Alec at all. But neither is wide receiver for Alec, and neither is quarterback. So Alec's got some things that he's got to kind of solve, and I feel like this week we might see some of these teams that are kind of on this teetering edge of, if you go 3 games under 500, you start to reaching kind of the, I don't know, not the quarter mark of the season, but you kind of want to, like, hey, I need as many wins as I can get right now. I feel like we might be seeing some teams that press themselves a little bit much. I am a little bit more this week, and honestly, I think, like, this is the week that teams should be kind of pressing the gas pedal a little bit on getting a trade done or really getting serious about it. Because I think if the teams are 1-3 and you go 1-4 going into next week, just as a reminder, that's a 20% chance of making the playoffs. If you go 2-3, it's a 49% chance. So it's getting pretty significant there. For the teams that are 2-2, losing and going 2-3, again, 49%. If you win and you're 3-2, it's a 72% chance of making the playoffs. So it's kind of a big make or break week for some of these teams that are kind of in this deviated spot. Again, the further and further the season goes on, as time is a literal line, things will continue to progress, but we are going to start deviating some of these groups. We still have clusters of teams together. These 1-3 teams are still clustered together. We got 2-2 teams clustered together. Eventually, by truly next week or so, we're going to start having a lot more permutations. I doubt that the pack is so broken up into these, like, 3 distinct chunks of, like, 3-1 teams, 2-2 teams, and 1-3 teams. But I expect Alec and Jesse, they have the best odds so far to kind of move up in this world. If they can make a couple of moves, they're right on the edge of that 8 seed. They can look forward to, like, Peyton and say, like, oh, Peyton's just taking some L's with some injuries right now, so that window is open, and just got to keep pace with the 8 seed. And then we have Tier 3. Tier 3, we have Mike, Cody, Mitch, and Tanner. The biggest change here is that Mike has moved down into Tier 3. That is namely because 66 points is bad. He's got one win to his name, which was in week 1, and it's starting to feel like a distant memory compared to what has happened. Cody got the win. He's at the 12 seed, and he got over 90 points. I'm still below league average, but he got over 90 points. He's still sitting at the 12 seed because he played Mike, who put up 66 points. I mean, it's not like a tough win. A win is a win, but it's not a tough win. Cody right now only has 13 touchdowns to his name. I just have my doubts. And again, this is still in that bit of a power ranking space. And eventually, within the next week or two, it'll transition to a more firm standings, expanded standing situation. I think the one thing that Cody can kind of look forward to, again, similarly with schedules, is that he has not played a bottom 4 team. He's yet to play his peers at the time that he played Mike. Mike was, he was a mid-5 team. So at least Cody can say, like, maybe it will get easier, maybe, when he plays Mitch or Tanner. And speaking of which, Mitch and Tanner are right there. Mitch, you said a lot in the chat about what I was supposed to be looking forward to for the Sunday, and you were really amped up for the first 35 minutes of Red Zone and stuff like that. And then it just kind of faded away. You had 78 points this week. The 91 points the previous week was one thing. We're always looking to see, like, where's the floor, where's the ceiling, and I feel like the average right now is truly Mitch's average. I think he hovers around 80 points a game. Has a lot to do with the underperformance. He's just collected quite a few of underperformers outside of Jahmyr Gibbs. Isaiah Pacheco is just not the same player. He's in a 3-way backfield now. Brian Thomas is just quite literally maybe the bust of the year. I mean, the guy, the Jags are winning, and they're not winning because of him. Drake London came back to life. Trey McBride has been relatively a bust as well. I mean, 11 targets and only 5 points on Thursday is kind of crazy. All I can say is, like, thank God you didn't play Luke McCaffrey or Hollywood Brown at all. I don't know. I don't know, Mitch. It's not looking good. I think the biggest kind of mark for Mitch's season is that going into the draft, again, historically speaking, he had the most money going into the draft, and he is sitting with the second lowest position right now. The other teams that had a lot of money was myself and Jaden, and we're sitting at like 1 and 2 right now. Christian is sitting in the 6th seed. So I don't know what the excuse necessarily is for Mitch's team. It's just been a lot of bad selections there. Then we have Tanner. Tanner finally scores over 90 points. Actually scores 115 points, which is a lot of points. Famously so. I've said that too many times. Can never say famously again. But he has scored a lot of points, and it just wasn't enough. Again, he played someone who had the second most points in the week. So Tanner sits at 0-4, and as I said last week, that was a kind of a make or break situation for him. 0-4 teams have a 6% chance of making the playoffs. If he goes 0-5, which basically if he loses this week, it's over. There's a 0% chance no team has ever come back from 0-5. So Tanner is really at that point where you kind of have to question. I mean, like, for a moment, I will say, I think what Tanner was trying to do with the getting money early and getting those players, and again, no one would say that those trades were bad in Tanner's favor. In fact, I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good value. You got Pookie and you got this much money in, or you got this for George Pickens. But I think the one thing that, as we experiment with different types of trades, and I strategically kind of like appreciate what Tanner was trying to do, whether he means to do this or not, but see if you can get a bunch of money early on, and then you have the majority of the season to solve or fix those problems. The waiver wire is still rich with opportunity at the early parts of the season when he made these trades, which were like week 1, week 2 kind of areas. Maybe you can kind of make up for it and then just kind of ride out the rest of the season with a bunch of money, but you can make all those trades and saves. But instead, what has happened is that he has essentially traded away both Cowboys. Both Cowboys, Pookie and Pickens, have become significant fantasy assets. And fantasy assets that, coincidentally, would really help Tanner right now in his quest for not being bad. And I think it's just a matter of just making bad bets. And this is the risk of early season moves like this, is that he made a bet early on that, like, hey, I think Zay Flowers is going to have one of those seasons because he, had a really great week one. And then since then, Zay Flowers has just basically fallen off, and now Lamar Jackson's hurt. The whole thing is just like not looking particularly solid in that sense. And then Devonta Smith, who he's been so thrilled to have, only to realize that Jalen Hurts now apparently can't complete a pass in the second half and doesn't really want to pass the ball to anyone but Dallas Goedert. And it's just not like both Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown have basically been completely suffering from all this. And then on top of that, you have Trey Tucker, who, pops off against a team that you're like, well, what a surprise. He popped off against the Washington Commanders in a garbage time and then plays Chicago and is bad again. So it's just the guesses that he's made have not worked out, and now it looks like the Tanner, to correct the ship of this, has to probably use some of that accumulated cash to get some help back on the squad. Otherwise, he's kind of going to be Sacco bound. The one thing that Tanner can think about, though, is the team from an underlying standpoint, and I will talk about this in the segment, the underlying standpoint of Tanner's team isn't like bad. Like the stats under the hood aren't horrible. He is good. He is the worst wide receiving core in the league by far, which is ironic that he's traded for and away some of those positions. But beyond that, like, we'll talk about this. It's not terrible. So Tanner has this decision of like, okay, season is lost. Like, the road to come back from this is pretty steep. Do you then hold your money and just see how the season plays out, and instead of trying to play for the playoffs, you just kind of play for the competition that's around you? So if you think that, like, I'm not making the playoffs, but I'm not going to go to the Sacco because I will do everything I can to work around this. And we've seen this strategy work a couple of times for people who are just like, okay, playing not to lose at that point. But you just kind of like watch the teams around you, like watch what all the 1-3 teams that could possibly be there, or the 1-4 teams for next week are going to be there. Where is their talent level at? And can you just do better than them? So when it comes down to that first week of flex seeding, hopefully you've done enough to not have a bye. But if you can kind of play yourself out of it, you can keep the money. The season would suck, but you're not going to be losing. I think the one thing that would really suck right now for Tanner is essentially you blow all the money that you've just earned, which does feel like it feels like an option, and I feel like you can't really punt the whole season, but just stick with me. You punt all the money that you just earned, trying to get the buyback players. You start winning and clawing yourself back, and you still lose out on making the playoffs, and maybe you go like 6-8 or something like that, or 7-7, and you just miss out. And now you're still back in the same position, and now you're going to be battling it out. Obviously with a better team, but with way less money and just a season of frustration under your belt. Now, with those scenarios in mind, those two of like basically punt it and say, hey, I lost. I'm not making the playoffs, but I will not be the Sacco. That obviously sucks because you're basically turning what is a 17-week-long season in which we all enjoy football into a 17-week-long season in which you hate football, and you are stressing every single week. So I don't know if that's a way for Tanner to – I don't know if that's a viable way for Tanner. And the other solution is you blow a bunch of your money, and I just don't know who's selling. And I think Tanner, he's thankfully in the need of a wide receiver. There's a lot of teams that have wide receivers, but I don't know if that's something that Tanner really wants to go down the path of, and it's not a guarantee he's going to make the playoffs. It could just be burning money and still missing the playoffs at that point. So that's the tiers we have there. Weekly points, the league average for the week was 98 points. Week 3 was 98 points. Week 2 was 97 points. So I think we're starting to get a cruising altitude there. Weekly position leaders, which we're going to talk about in a bit, are all there. I only have I have two anecdotal things. Dylan is at 99 wins on the season, or in his career. So if he wins this week in week 5, he will be the third team to join the 100 club, myself and Cal included. So that's a significant moment for Dill there. And then there was another, and Peyton is 3 losses away from 100. He's the next closest, century mark maker there, with 97 losses. So those are your 2 significant, league record situations. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was, I didn't realize this. I don't think anyone really realized it at the time, but in the historical stats section, in the scoring section, we have our regular season scoring, which I keep updated every single week, just tracking all the 100-point games and the points for average, that sort of thing. And you can kind of compare it to past seasons in the past. At the very bottom, I always have like a highest score, lowest score, highest loss, and lowest win. Sometimes those are like really, kind of just, this is all just high points. So you just want to kind of know what it is. And we've had some pretty hilarious like low scores. We've had some really low wins. I think famously, Brian was kind of a real winner at the lowest win situation, at least in 23 and 22. He had a lowest win of 57 and a lowest win of 61, which is just absolutely crazy to have that low. But why I'm bringing all this up is that I've never seen this happen before, but we actually have a tie for the season on lowest win score. Cody and Brandon have scored 75.28 points to secure a lowest win. I think Cody did this in week 1. Brandon just did this week. But we've never technically had a tie in that sense. And we have never had a matchup tie. Those decimals have kind of taken that away. But let it be known that the one man who has the most ties in the league, Brandon, would find a way to tie someone else in some form or another. So he has tied Cody with the lowest win record for the season at 75.28 points. And personally, I hope that no one goes lower than this, just so that can stay there as a little bit of an anecdote. Because of course, as soon as there's a lower win, I will erase this and put in that lower win. But this whole little moment in time, this little stat will disappear, unfortunately, with that. So just had to take a moment to just like, of course, Brandon found a way to tie, even when you're not supposed to. So let's go into our main segment. So our main segment for this week, again, like I've kind of been alluding to, we all don't know really what's going on. No one can really guess what's happening in this league. Fantasy football is a fickle beast. It is bad for our health and all of that sort of things. But a lot of the reasons why the Nut Report exists and a lot of the reasons why we kind of deep dive further than the sleeper standings is that we can kind of find some rhyme and reason to a lot of these things. So this segment, I think I did a little bit last year, but I want to put a little more statistical rigor behind it. It's inspired by Talking Shit and Talking Sense. This is the Podley's version of Legit or Shit. So we've got 5 weeks we got 4 weeks really under our belt, but we're on week 5. We've got one undefeated team. We've got one winless team. So I think it's fair to say, out of everyone else who falls in between, which teams are legit and which teams are shit. And instead of having that be subjective of like, and this guy's doing good because I said so, and this guy's doing bad because I said so, I wanted to use a tried and true test that's been very unique to the DVFFL. There's a lot of different tools out there, power rankings that you can use and all sorts of things, which at times I will utilize for different reasons. But for this particular exercise, I feel like at this stage, instead of projecting out, let's look at what we actually know. And what we actually know is the points that we've all scored. So instead of projecting out with power ranking and saying like, well, technically this person's going to be legit for X reasons because of this algorithm, let's use our categories. So we all know the 4/6 category rule. Again, as a reminder, if you are over the playoff average in 4 out of our 6 categories, you are a championship/playoff team, but you're a contender. And last year at this point of the season, Cal was 4/6 and he won the chip. So that's using week 5 of the same moment from last year. Cal, our eventual winner, won the chip and he was 4/6. So this is a actual valid use case. And the reason why we're doing it in categories, again, like I said, is like we are going to use stats of things that we've actually done as opposed to projections. So this is who these teams are. And I feel like it's a good way to like kind of look at it in a reframe of saying like, oh, this team is pretty legit or this team is shit. And there's some surprising results in this. Now, let me be the first to say, though, this season is still very young. We're only 4 weeks under our belts. And like I mentioned before, teams can quickly change their tunes within the next couple weeks. So by no means am I saying this team is legit. There's a myriad of things that can happen. They could trade away something. They could get injured. They could do this. They could do that. So this is just a mere moment to look into the mirror. That was a good use of words there. And to say, like, hey, these are pretty legit teams. Maybe this kind of bolsters the reason why someone wants to trade, or maybe is the reason why, like, hey, I think actually I'm doing pretty good. I didn't think of it this way. I'm going to hold on one more week and just see what this is looking like. Or maybe my team is starting to come around, which I feel like there's some teams that are starting to like slowly right the ship if their ship was a large ship. So what I've done is I've categorized all 6 of those categories. And those categories are like teams that are 6 out of 6, 5 out of 6, 4 out of 6, 3 out of 6, 2 out of 6, 1 out of 6, 0 out of 6 in those categories. So we don't have any teams that are 6 out of 6 or 5 out of 6. And that means, they're above the line of 5 out of 6 categories or et cetera. But for the teams that are 4 out of 6, those are your playoff contenders. These are the teams that are legit. They are in the playoffs. They're going to be a player in the playoffs. They're kind of like a team to watch out for. If there were teams that are 6 out of 6 in those playoff categories, they would basically be like, champion in the wings, essentially. I mean, that's a dominant season if you're 6 out of 6. Teams that are 3 out of 6, 3 out of 6 of the playoff categories, these are legit playoff hopefuls. These are teams that are going to be in the mix until the very end. These are teams that are going to be anywhere between, the 4 seed to the 8 seed. But they're definitely in the playoffs and they're in that conversation, or, their teams are set up to be in that conversation. Teams that are 2 out of 6 are battling for the 8 seed and or Sacco Flex seeding. These are teams that, like, if things break right, they could make it to the 8 seed. Tiebreakers are probably going to be their helpful thing, but that's their goal, is 8 seed. Otherwise, they will be kind of in the conversation for that Sacco Flex seeding. Teams that are 1 over 6 are Sacco contenders. These are the teams that are going to be making up your 10 to 14 spots, but they could fall to the 11th or 13th spot and basically in the Sacco contender. And the teams that are 0 out of 6 are Sacco bound. These are teams that at this current moment are shit, I should say. And I guess if you want to categorize it any way higher than that, teams that are 2, 1, or 0 out of categories, those teams are shit. And teams that are 3, 4, and obviously 5 or 6 are legit. So let us begin. For the teams that are 4 out of 6 on the categories, we have myself. Tier 1, I'm 4 out of 6. I'm above the line in QB, RB, defense, and kicking. And that's the entire list. That's just one team that's over 4 out of 6. My worst category is tight end, in which I'm 7th. Wide receiver, I'm right below the average. My train is just a chugging along. And that's all you can ask for right now. I'm just keep the machine going, and we'll keep the segment going. We have 7 teams that are 3 over 6 in their categories. Those teams are Tier 1 team Jaden, QB, wide receiver, and kicker. Tier 1 team Dylan, QB, running back, kicker. Tier 1 team Nick, QB, wide receiver, kicker. Tier 1 team Brandon, QB, tight end, kicker. Tier 2 team Christian, QB, defense, kicker. Tier 2 team Cal, wide receiver, tight end, defense. And Tier 3 team Tanner, QB, tight end, defense. So obviously a lot of names. All the rest of Tier 1, Jaden, Dill, Nick, and Brandon are there. 2 Tier 2 teams, which are the 2 teams that I feel like could jump into Tier 1 if things break right. Christian and Cal are right there. But curiously, Tanner is also right there with 3 categories to his name. So if I'm looking at this from a Christian, Cal, but mostly Tanner perspective, I look at this and say, like, okay, if I'm in 3 out of the 6 categories and I'm in the playoff hopeful and my record doesn't reflect that, and Tanner's record certainly does not, potentially you could say this is bad luck. And I would say that for all of Tanner's woes that I was talking about earlier, these paths that he has to choose, whether he wants to sell the farm and try to make it happen or, kind of wait it out and kind of see what the what the rest of the season brings. The one thing that is a constant is that I think Tanner's been pretty unlucky for things to work out. I mean, especially this week, you can't really pick your opponent, nor can you decide what's going to happen. But to finally get over 100 points, really kind of finally over 90 points, and then just get blown out with the second highest points for the week, that sucks. That's just unlucky. And using kind of a schedule simulator to kind of answer some of these questions, to really illustrate how Tanner's schedule is bad. I'm currently 4-0. If I had Tanner's schedule, I would have a 500 record. And for everyone else's schedule that I would have a 4-0 or 3-1 record. So only Tanner's schedule would I be 500. So that kind of illustrates that, like, even a team that has been scoring over 100 points in every game, like myself, I wouldn't even find the same success if I had Tanner's schedule. So if anything, Tanner, let that be a bit of a hope island, so to speak. You have just a twinge of hope all right there. And speaking of schedules, I feel like it's kind of a point right here because, again, we're looking at these teams from a categorical statistical standpoint. I want to take a moment just to like talk about schedules. Again, I used a schedule simulator to kind of like see where everyone would do it. I used to do this by hand until I found a website that can actually do this automatically, which, boy, howdy, does that change everything. So I'm going to highlight some of those wacky schedules. So far, the easiest schedules this 4 weeks in have been Cody. Cody's had an easy schedule. Only teams in which they would have losing records would be Mike and Mitch. If they played Cody's schedule, everyone else would have a winning record. Brandon has an easy schedule. Only Mike and Mitch, again, would have losing records, which could more or less speak to those two teams and where they're at right now. But Brandon's got a very easy schedule. Nick, not surprised at all by this, but he has an easy schedule. Only Mitch would have a losing record. Everyone else would have a winning record if they played Nick's schedule. And Peyton, only Cody would have a losing record. Everyone else would have a winning record, including Mike and Mitch, if they played Peyton's schedule. On the flip side, the hardest schedules, which I've talked about already with Tanner, Tanner has the fourth hardest schedule right now. Only Dill, Jaden, and Christian would have a winning record right now. If they had Tanner's schedule. So everyone else would have a losing record, including myself. Mike has had a hard schedule. Only Dill, Jaden, and myself would have a winning record if we had Mike's schedule. Everyone else would have a losing record. Jesse also has a really hard schedule. Only Dill and myself would have winning records. Everyone else would have a losing record. And Christian has also had an extremely hard schedule. And he has actually the hardest schedule thus far. And only me would have a winning record. Everyone else would have a losing record with Christian's schedule. So if that helps kind of paint the picture for at least the bottom part of this group here, that schedules start to play more and more of a role. Now, going back to the broader themes of what this group of 7 look like, is you heard me rattle off a lot of positions. QB, though, was the number one thing. And I think the one thing I want to kind of extrapolate from this kind of segment is that we always talk about every year, there's always like a position group that really matters. And I think in past years, it's been so evidently known as a narrative of like QBs are the reason why. Like the QBs, you need to have a good QB, and if you don't, you suck. And I don't know if that exact thing has been kind of laid out for this particular season, but I'm here to lay it out. And I think it's QB. If you don't have a good QB, your team is going to be bad. Your team is shit. I think the legit teams are the ones that have QBs. And 7 out of the 8 teams that are 3/6 and above, that includes myself, all are top scorers in QB. The only one who does not have a top scoring QB right now is Cal. And he has a wide receiver, tight end, and defense. So I think it's safe to say, and I'm just going to put it out there, that you have to have a good QB if you want to have a legit shot at the playoffs, at the legit shot at the championship. Not every year is going to be this way, and I hope that doesn't always end up that way, but it feels like this year with like the highest end, the most money ever spent for a QB being there, it only makes sense that the QBs are going to matter even more than they ever have before. The only team, interestingly enough though, the only team in this group of 8 teams that are in the top, the 7 teams that are in the top scoring for QB, only one team minimally invested in the position. This means that they spent less than $10 in the draft, or they didn't keep a player on this list, which is like the Baker Mayfields and the Jaden Daniels of the world. and that is Nick. Nick famously drafted like Caleb Williams and some garbage, and he's right there in the top scoring for QB. So it's definitely shows that the pathway isn't that, hey, you spend a bunch of money on QB, you end up on the list. You spend a bunch of money on the QB, and you make getting on the list much easier than otherwise. I think all the other teams that kind of had punted that position or spent way less on the position, they just, I guess, got lucky. I mean, the Caleb Williams of it all, kind of keeping Nick in there, is pretty crazy. I mean, he's 6th right now in QB scoring. He's just a hair above the playoff average by only like a point or so. Jaden is a 10th of a point above the playoff average, but granted, Jaden has been missing Jaden Daniels the entire time, which, again, testament to Mariota for keeping the ship moving. But yeah, that's the interesting point there. Everyone else, Christian spent big for Josh Allen. Brandon spent big for Lamar Jackson. Those are your top 2. I spent 14, I think, for Mahomes. I'm sitting at 3. Tanner spent an ungodly sum for Jalen Hurts. He's sitting at 4th right now. Dill kept Baker. And then, like I said, Nick drafted Caleb Williams kind of late and cheap. And then Jaden kept Jaden Daniels. And then that's everyone else from there is below the playoff line. So that's something to kind of extrapolate out for the season. Is I think it's the year of the QB, as it has been a couple of times out there. You also heard in those categories that kicker is a very popular group. 6 out of the 8 teams in the top section of this, the legit teams, all above the playoff line in kicking. So could it be a dual, year of the QB, year of the kicker? Could be. I feel like the legit teams are maximizing those secondary positions that often are forgotten, or the ones that are kind of the throwaway positions, like kicking and defense. And as we know from the draft, and the conversation starting to drum up, and I think this is probably the last year in which people are kind of on the fence about it, kicking and defense significantly matters. Way more than tight end. I'm going to now be the guy who's like, in the tight end position just doesn't matter. Let me just lay this out for you. The top scorers in those 3 bottom categories, which are not, these are like the secondary categories, QB, running back, and wide receiver. Those are the sexy ones. Tight end, defense, and kicking are not usually sexy. But again, I laid this out from one of the first episodes of the season, saying how much money is spent from QB in the tight end position. And like the tight end, sometimes in years past, actually was more money spent in the tight end position than QB, though QB almost triples the amount of points that you'd score in the season than you would from the tight end position. But even looking at defense and kicking, which again are positions in which you could get away, and I guess there's a lot of options, a lot of variance in those positions. You could get away with like a $1 kicker, $1 defense. It happens. They could be fantastic. It happens. Totally happens. But it is also a crapshoot, because look at the differences here. So for tight end, the top scorer right now is Peyton. He's got 38 points on the year. For defense, the top scorer is Christian with 69 points in the year, and the top scoring for kicking is me with 52 points on the year. Again, those positions are, I obviously spent a lot for Brandon Aubrey. Christian, I don't know if he spent much for the Lions. I don't know if he spent anything for the Lions, not off the top of my head. But you kind of look at that and you go, like, that's almost like 2/3 the more points than what Peyton's getting from the tight end position. And yet tight end traditionally is one of those spots where you could easily drop $20, $12, $15, and everyone goes like, yeah, makes sense. You just want to be good at that position. And if you drop $20 on a defense, that's going to be laughing you out of the room, but yet you're still getting more points if you can guarantee yourself the top position there. To make it matters even worse, like I talked about with tight ends, Alec and Jaden, they're sub 10 with their points so far, 4 weeks in. Definitely candidates here for missing the point. But you look at the bottom of the defense and kicking scoring. Well, kicking is a little bit of an adventure, but bottom of defense, Mike and Mitch there, 33 and 25 points. 33 points from Mike at 13th for defense is 5 less than the best tight end scorer right now, which is Peyton. Kicking 30th is Peyton. He has 30 points on the year as Peyton at the 13th position. And then Jesse is 14th with 13.7 points, which arguably is a hard point to argue because that's really low for a kicking. He's only averaging 3 points from his kicker right now. So that's a hard point to argue. But for Peyton, he's got 30 points on the year from his kicking. He's 13th in kicking. And again, that is 8 points off of him leading the tight end position. So all this to say, I think that going forward, it's it's going to be really hard to ignore kicking and defense as non-essential categories. I think they're starting to become very essential, and all that does is it's going to start to spread the money out even further, which could potentially mean running backs and wide receivers get slightly cheaper because you have to allocate your money down a little lower. Tight ends, truly, I think we're entering, though they're the best tight ends in the league exist. Like, this is probably the best NFL's ever had with tight ends. These athletic freaks, like the George Kittles and the Brock Bowers of the world, they're all there. But the position just inherently, unless they become the absolute focal point of the passing game, which we already have several that are theoretically that, they're just not good. And they're not good enough to warrant the price. So I can kind of see a world where tight ends, I would hope next year, are at this stage, if we had to say the season's over, and this is what we know, tight ends are probably going to be, they should be less than $10 for the most part. But kicking and defense are going to be pushing $10, probably $15 for the good ones. So in conclusion, for this group, again, 8 teams, I'm lumping myself into this, these legit playoff teams. QBs and kicking seem to be the positions that are the big role, the big themes out of these legit teams thus far. Teams that are 2 over 6. So these are teams that are on fringe playoff, fringe Sacco flex seating kind of spaces. We have Peyton, tier 2, tight end defense, Alec, tier 2, running back and defense, and Mitch, tier 3, tight end and kicking. So I just spent a good amount of time talking about tight end and the blaring theme here of tight ends really don't matter, and yet you have 2 teams here in the 2 over 6 kind of fringe playoff that are thriving in the tight end position. That's Peyton and Mitch. It's just, I've said enough about it. It's just an interesting correlation that these teams that are kind of fringy are leading the way in tight end. I think Alec, out of the 3 of these teams, I think has the most kind of like robust path here. He can get his QB under control. That's one thing, but he's got that RB rock, and I feel like having all categories are created equal. I'm not saying that if you're over the category and kicking doesn't disqualify you as a less than category, but having that playoff line with running back or wide receiver, since that line is often very, very high. Currently, there's only 3 teams over the line in running back and only 4 teams over the line in wide receiver. But to have yourself over the line in those categories, it just has a little bit of a different sheen to it, so to speak. So Alec being over the line at this point is a good sign for his prospects. He's doing pretty terrible at QB. He's 13th right now, only averaging 13 points a game. And he's not doing great at wide receiver either. He's 12th, averaging 16 points a game. The number 1 team is Jaden, who's averaging 36 points a game. So pretty long way to go. We already talked about Alec in the tight end position. So Alec's kind of bottomed out in a lot of these other spots. So he's got a bit of a way to go. But again, I like that running back right there. But anyway, I think Peyton is probably like I said, Alec has got that hope of a really good category. Peyton is right under the line for QB and running back, so he could potentially have had 4 categories, but he is truly just under that line. So I think Alec and Peyton, they have a bit of a rosier picture here. I can't paint the same one for Mitch. He's the lowest scoring team in the league. There's not a lot of categories he's close to. He's 10th or worse in the remaining 4 categories that he's not over the line for. And again, those 2 categories he's over the line for are tight end and kicking. The lowest and second lowest points per game positions. So he's there, but that's not that bad. He's fringe Sacco, flex, fringe playoff. Teams that are 1 over 6, these are teams that are currently stand as Sacco contenders. These are the teams that are going to make up kind of like the bottom of if the season ended today. These are the shit teams. We have Jesse, he's over the line at tight end, and we have Cody, he's over the line in kicking. This, again, we've talked about tight end. Jesse's right there on the line. Again, all categories are made equal, but not great there. And like I mentioned before, Cody with kicking is his best position. It's better than his QB position. He's averaging more points as kicker than he is from starting QB. Just, it's kind of shit right now. It's just a little shit for both these teams. Not a lot of like optimism from they're really close to the line on this, that, and the other. Jesse is kind of firmly in the middle of it. Jesse is pretty close on the running back. I mean, he's 5th right now in running back scoring, and he's 7th in wide receiving scoring. So I think if he can look to that could be a way in that he can kind of work himself forward. Otherwise, Cody, he's struggling across the board. He's really bad at QB. He just made the trade, so maybe that changes it. 11th in running back, 6th in wide receiver, so not too bad there. 12th in tight end. He is 10th in running and in defense, and then he's 2nd in kicking. And then, if you're doing the math, we've only named 13 teams. There is one last team that is 0/6, meaning they are Sacco bound, but meaning they also have not crossed the category in any of these categories. And that is a tier 3 team. That is Mike. This one's kind of a surprise to me. Namely the fact that he's not over the category with QB, with Herbert. I mean, Herbert has been basically the talk of fantasy football, talk of NFL. He's been an absolute revelation. He looks like an MVP candidate for the team. And yet with Herbert, he's only averaging the 9th most amount of QB points, which I think is, again, another chapter, another feather in this is the year of the QB, and getting Herbert, of all people, who's been doing so well, doing as well as he is, and that's still not good enough to cross that playoff line, is just showing how intense the QB position is. I don't think that this is like necessarily one in which I can point to like this, that, and the other being the problem, but I do think that Mike is in the need of changing some things up to make a difference, because being 0/6 is a pretty significant, not good thing. So that kind of wraps up these kind of like statistical looking at legit and shit. The shit teams, starting from the bottom up, is Mike. We have Jesse and Cody. We have Peyton, Alec, and Mitch. And then we have our legit teams, which is a big cluster. We have Tanner, Cal, Christian, Brandon, Nick, Dylan, Jaden, and myself. Again, this is just from a statistical, like the things where I say like the underlying stats are looking pretty good for this team. This is really what I'm looking at. Like the underlying stats are looking pretty good. It does not factor in schedule, does not factor in all the buys and everything. This just looks at what we've accomplished so far in the season, and are these teams pretty legit if you put their numbers against everybody else. And I think it's fair to say that we've got all the playoff contenders outside of Tanner in this group. We've got 8 teams here. Tanner's underlying stats don't look that bad, but his schedule looks that bad. And I think that's sometimes the context that is always needed, is to remind ourselves that like sometimes it can be that bad. Sometimes you got to look at some of the rosier pictures, because sometimes we react to things that are completely out of our control, and we react to things that can undo any kind of positive progress that we might potentially have. So let this be just kind of whether this is a soothing, okay, things are what I thought they were, but I couldn't put a finger on it, or let this be oh my God, I need to change something up. This is that time. And at least you know from these categories exactly where, this is why those categories are so important, in my opinion. You know exactly where to triage. So with that, that is the end of the Week 5 Podly Weekly. That is the end of the tiers. That is the end of the Nut Report. And that is the end of me speaking.